Motion to reconvene our open session. Got and reporting out. Council went into a. Do I do this now or at the
Just
council?
now, yeah.
Okay. Council went into a closed session to discuss potential litigation in regards to an agreement, personal matters, and identifiable individuals in the labor relations matter and proposed or pending disposition of land and seaboard. Number 3, can I get a mover and a seconder for confirmation of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Deal, second by Councillor Dalton. That the agenda for the public meeting dated February 4th, 2025 be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? And motion carries. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest by any member of council at this time? Seeing none. Number 5, zoning bylaw amendment, zoning map modernization. I think I just turned this over. Welcome, Jay.
Just a second, pull our slides up, so.
Oh, there is actually a note here. It says, this meeting is for information purposes only. No decisions will be made. So this is just for council and or the public to gather information.
Thank you. Yeah, so purpose of today is just to give council and members of the public an update on the process so far, and that's where we're at with consultation and draft maps. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions of council and of the public as well. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our modernization project is essentially to update the maps. They were created in 2006 and were initially based on 1999 aerial photography. And the software used to create these maps is no longer supported from a technical perspective. So that's kind of the pressing factor to update the maps and put them in a software that can be supported and continually updated. So we're proposing new zone maps to be reformatted, mostly to improve accessibility, readability, overall user friendliness. We've also been able to reduce the overall amount of maps over 95 formats. They're on large scale now, and just generally easier to read and understand, as well as improved accuracy and to reflect current aerial photography. So these maps are based on the 2020 aerial images. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the project timeline so far. So in September of 2024, the project was initiated by council and we circulated a first draft of the mapping. Then in November, we held 3 public open houses following harvest season in Brussels, Seaforth, and Brucefield. We also had an online mapping viewer available for public to check out their property and make sure their zoning looks correct. And then from November to January, we made some edits in response to feedback from agencies and landowners, and also engaged in further discussion with landowners where there was questions or concerns about new properties. And today we're holding the public open house for information purposes. We'll gather feedback from council and from members of the public and proposing to bring revised maps back in March as well as a final staff report. So just a quick summary of some of the consultation that we've done to date. So as I mentioned, the open houses in November of last year, we held one in each ward after harvest season, try to get around to different times to make it accessible for folks. We also advertise via social media platforms and the citizen and expositor newspapers, as well as the website, Kearney's Ask Residents, and physical posters, as well as the fall newsletter mail out. And notably, as I mentioned, we use the online mapping viewer for the first time, available to the public to look at post mapping changes. And this was well received, and many landowners were able to just check their zoning on that viewer without having to come into any of the open houses or ask questions. And then further, we've had staff discussion with individual landowners and consultation with applicable agencies, so MBCA and ABCA particularly. Next slide. So just at a high level, I'll go over some of the proposed map changes and kind of give an overview of what our new maps look like. So this slide here, you can see on the left is an example of our current maps. So they're grayscale, black and white, kind of a lot going on them. And then on the right is an example of our new proposed maps. So larger scale, we've added color, removed any unnecessary information to make it easier to read. Next slide, please. Then just a little bit more detailed of that. We've also introduced a new index map for ease of finding your property. And then on the right is an example of some of the other formatting additions that we've done. So the landfill buffer is shaded in pink to highlight that as a flag for potential impacts to properties. We've more clearly conveyed wellhead protection zones where that's impacting particular properties. And to flag that there's additional policies that may apply to these areas. And then we've added some color for different features on the landscape. So water courses, natural environment, and conservation authority regulated lands. Next slide, please. So overall, some minor text changes which relate directly to the maps are proposed. So several AG1 special zones that are no longer needed are proposed to come out. ER1 zones where the license has been surrendered are proposed to either revert to AG1 or apply holding, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then proposing to remove the ER3-1 and ER4-2 zones, which were used as a aggregate flag zone, and then the shift to the 2-zone industrial approach. Next slide, please. There's a little bit more detail on those on the agricultural areas. So 26 AG1 special zones, AG1 and AG4 special zones are supposed to be removed. So many of those relate to livestock limitations or MDS restrictions that are no longer existing, and some of these special zones are no longer legally applicable. So just tidying that up. So for extracted resources, as I mentioned, for zones, for ER1 zones where the license has been surrendered or is otherwise inactive based on the ministry information, a holding zone is proposed to indicate that extraction is no longer permitted in some cases, where the surrendered ER1 zone has been fully rehabilitated to agriculture. The zoning is proposed to revert to agriculture. And then, as I mentioned, those ER3 and ER4 zones are proposed to be removed entirely. They acted as a more of a flag zone that aggregate extraction could be possible, but it did not actually permit aggregate extraction. Next slide. So here's just an example on the left where the ER1-H approach is proposed. So we've got a mix of some agricultural land, some natural environment, water bodies. So we've proposed a holding zone in this case. And then on the right there is an example where an AG1 zone is proposed as the aggregate pit has been fully rehabilitated to agriculture. So then in the industrial zone, we are proposing the current IND zone to be split into 2 zones, would be an M1, which would be a light industrial zone, and an M2 as the general industrial zone. So the M1 zone would include a scoped list of permitted uses that are considered more compatible with sensitive uses and proximity. So how we've looked at this is affected properties were considered based on existing uses, proximity to the sensitive receptors, so residential areas, wellhead protection areas, and are just trying to ensure maximum compatibility between these different uses. And Denise can speak a little bit more to that later. Next slide. So just an example of this. This is a proposed M1 change in Seaforth. So for the north end of Seaforth, this is an existing contractor's yard. It's a fairly small property. You can see the various residential uses abutting it, and this property is also across from the well. So within the wellhead protection area, additional wellhead protection policies would also affect this property, which go even further than our light industrial zone. And then just a couple text changes that are not related to the map amendments, more housekeeping stuff. So housekeeping correction to implement a 4-unit limit on-farm labor housing. That was the on-farm labor housing was included in our housing-friendly review, so we're just proposing a limit on that. And then adding dwelling with supports as a permitted use to the community facility zone to provide more flexibility in those uses there. So I'll pass it over to Lise here, and she can speak more on the mapping change.
Thank you, Shay. Good evening, council. So I've had the pleasure of using this bylaw for the past 20 years, and I think overall it served here needs very well. The maps are, however, a bit difficult to understand and interpret, and it's important to remember what they're based on. So in creating more accuracy for the agriculture and natural environment zones, again, what we have to remind ourselves is that some of the, when we were updating it, we have to remember it was based off of 1999 black and white aerial photography. It was just more difficult to interpret. So some areas were incorrectly zoned agriculture and some areas were incorrectly zoned natural environment. The goal of this process is simply to update the maps and reflect or accurately reflect the features that exist on the landscape. So we have had a significant number of changes and corrections, I would say. So overall improved accuracy in the natural environment mapping along woodlots and particularly along drains. We've also updated floodplain mapping based on updated Conservation Authority data. And more than just the data has been updated, the way that we're displaying that data is easier to understand comparatively to the existing maps. And so as an example, if we want to go to next, it'll show, yeah, again, just some of the tidying up. So if you look at the natural environment areas, previously it's a light gray and a dark gray. What that symbolizes is the NE1 and NE2 zones. The dark green, or what was formerly light gray, are the provincially significant wetlands. So what we have in front of us on the screen right now is a snapshot from the gray ward. Of the areas that are provincially significant wetlands. They are mostly found in the gray ward. And so we do have a differentiation that simply lets us, as staff know, oh, okay, that area is a PSW as opposed to being an otherwise natural environment area. What you'll also note is back in 2006, they took the approach of putting all the areas along municipal drains as natural environment. What we know is that's not necessarily an accurate reflection. In most cases, the farm field goes right up to that municipal drain. So we removed all of those areas that were sort of these long fingers that sort of followed the drains, simply isn't accurate. Something we are carrying through and has worked very well is the Conservation Authority notification areas. Those are the light green dots. What that means is that that's an area of the property. It's not zoned natural environment, it's zoned agriculture. But someone should know that it does experience seasonal flooding. And if you wanted to build there, you would likely need a permit from the local conservation authority. So again, that's worked very well in Huron East, and we're going to carry on with that approach. Go to the next slide. I also wanted to give you a sense of just how different the maps can be. So 1999, you see on the left-hand side, generally speaking, 20 years later, it looks roughly the same. That you can see in the center of this particular block, we do have a removal of a natural environment area. And so that's simply been reflected on the new map. So again, we're not talking major shifts, but some of the things that have contributed, I would say number one, it was the quality of the aerials to begin with. Number two, it's the extent of the impact of the emerald ash borer. We have seen natural areas being removed, tidied up, whatnot, because of the impact of ash. And the third thing I would say is that if we reflect on what the farmland price was in 1999 compared to what it is today, farmers have absolutely squared up fields and have removed natural features. Cumulatively, what that's led to is a net decrease in the natural environment zoning in Huron East to the tune of approximately 1,700 acres. Okay, so that's from multiple reasons. Cumulative impacts of removals, and originally probably some of the zoning being off from the get-go. But just so council knows, that is what we've led to. There's not, I think there was some concern maybe from landowners a few years ago that there might be more natural environment zoning. There is not. It's absolutely a reduction. Okay, next slide. Staff have consulted, most significantly with ABCA and MBCA, for their direction on these maps, and both have been very pleased and agree that there's some significant improvements being made. We also had a direct correspondence with an HCFA representative. They attended one of the open houses and let us know that their membership is aware of the online viewer and had been checking it. They were also, appreciative of the fact that we did hold open houses after the harvest so that their membership could attend if they wanted to. Next slide. In terms of comments received, we did receive 3 written comments that I wanted to bring to council's attention. The first are landowners in McKillop. They have issued letters of no trespass to both municipal and county staff in the past, and they generally disagree with the zoning of private property, and so they do not wish for their lands to be zoned. The second was someone who visited us at the Brussels open house. A resident in Brussels that has some concerns with the zoning as it relates to the Maitland River, particularly along Sports Drive, and I will show you an image of that next. And finally, Jason Out is here with us tonight, so I am going to let Jason obviously provide his comments for himself, but does have some concerns with the proposed approach, moving from a general industrial zone to a light industrial zone. So it might be appropriate, I think, for council to hear from Mr. Out himself, and then if I can help provide any clarification, I absolutely will. From a staff perspective, the goal here was to better delineate where we're directing light industrial uses versus some of our general or heavier industrial uses. The goal is to protect both of these land uses and protect the investment. The way to do that is to maximize the separation distance such that industries specifically do not have to move to expensive mitigation measures. We have heard from industries in Huron East and the county generally, I would say, that have experienced the encroachment of sensitive uses towards their industries, and it can cause for some expensive retrofits. I think that's something we'd like to avoid moving forward. If I go to the next slide, I'll just point out here, this is the area along Sports Drive. For the Brussels Ward councillors, you will note that this is an area where there has been some recent development, as well as Sports Drive was recently redone by the municipality. What's interesting along Sports Drive is that there is a significant floodplain. So the Maitland River is at the sort of the right side of the screen. In the middle, what you're seeing is a floodplain. And that's one of those areas where you would be subject to a Maitland Valley Conservation Authority permit. And really, they wouldn't direct any development in that area as it does flood. However, when you get to Sports Drive, there is a little bit of a ridge. And in that ridge, that area has been zoned R1 to date. We had some concerns expressed. We then double checked that mapping with Maitland Valley Conservation Authority, and they said that what we have is accurate. So I think what was surprising to maybe neighbors is that they would have thought that that area along Sports Drive did not have any development potential. And in fact, there has been a recent semi-detached built. So we have verified that, and there are no further changes proposed from a staff perspective. Next slide. This is the property that Mr. Out did send us a letter on. And so again, I will just maybe reserve any further comments there and allow him to address his property on 7th Avenue in Benastra. In terms of next steps, I'll just sort of outline what would happen after this evening. So the purpose of tonight is the public meeting. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address council. Staff will then consider all input received, both from members of the public as well as council direction. We will make necessary revisions and bring back this final staff report with the final maps and the final amending bylaw. We anticipate doing so at your March 4th meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Denise. Actually, I go to the public first. So any members of the public? I see 2 members of the public in attendance. Sir, did you have anything particular you wanted to ask or comments at this time?
Not at this time, I just catching up on the new map.
Okay, thank you. Jason, we did get a letter, just handed out at the start of this, but hopefully you can summarize this and share your comments.
I do have some additional comments if you would engage me.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a matter of minutes. I appreciate the council for its time. Please bear with me here. Ladies and gentlemen, council, thanks for your time. I'm Jason Out. Myself and my brothers, Stephen and Andrew, own and operate Vanastra Packaging. The business started with our late parents, Peter and Joan. I found out about the proposed changes regarding the property by chance. I noticed on social media that Huron East was updating their maps. I immediately engaged Megan McCullum and then Shay Stoll. I inquired and presented all roll numbers of properties we own in the municipality. I was then emailed a notice dated November 21st, 2024. The notice informed me that our property was to be downgraded from M2 to M1. Imagine my dismay finding this out. We purchased this property over 10 years ago to expand our current operations. I'm speaking against the proposed rezoning of this property. In my recent conversations with the planning department, I have pressed them and asked why. They have yet to articulate. Our family is an integral part of the agricultural supply chain. Indirectly, we package and process feed ingredients which are used in the local and international pet and animal nutrition markets. Our business is integral as it supports neighboring feed mills and the farming community. I've known Vanastra my whole life. As a child, I learned to swim in Vanastra. Our family emigrated to Canada from the Netherlands post-World War II. They settled in Huron County, had a family, tilled the fertile ground, and operated the business in Vanastra. Our family has a very special connection with CFB Clinton, now Vanastra. Our families were liberated by Canadian soldiers and the radar technology developed at the base. We have not forgotten this. Vanastra Packaging has been a business since 1993, and as business owners, we've made our mark in the community. We have demonstrated leadership and tenacity through buying derelict properties and cleaning them up. We have also saved 4 buildings from the wrecking ball. We believe that our cleanup efforts have greatly improved the aesthetics of Vanastra and the community. These efforts have brought great companies to Vanastra, plus attracted other companies to locate here. Our most notable property is a historic radome. This property is very special to us. It memorializes the past glory of the radar contribution to the liberation of our forefathers. We took it upon ourselves to restore and light this landmark. We've enjoyed operating our business in Vanastra since 1999. We have purchased neighboring industrial land to grow our business. We have recently retooled the plant and expanded its capacity to remain viable. We require the zoning to remain unchanged to remain viable. We bought this property to develop. I'm proud to share our local involvement by volunteering and participating in the Vanastra BRE committee on behalf of Huron East, donating money to the Vanastra Rec Center, donating to the Vanastra Curling Club, donating to the Vanastra Village Alliance. We participated with the Lions Club and Vanastra Christian Reformed Church National Liberation 75 Tulip Planting Campaign, which was nationwide. We've donated trees, Locals Lions Club to promote Earth Day in Vanastra. Stephen and I are serving as board members on the Manufacturing Association. I've also served as a board member on the Huron Economic Development Board. Andrew, Stephen, and myself have been on the Soil and Crop Improvement Association for Huron County. We are champions and advocates. We have worked with the Salvo Bayfield Conservation Authority for several years. We've implemented the best management practices, establishing tree lines to mitigate environmental concerns. And I have documentation of our buildings through the last years and our plantings with Salvo Bayfield, and I can provide them should you like. And environmental considerations. We have recently been operating under the Ministry of Environment permitting standards since 2014. We recently retooled the plant and have updated the environmental permitting. Spencer Bannon of Grit Engineering has completed this requirement. We also have a letter of support that you folks have in front of you. Our operation is doing business next to a 3-story apartment building and currently operates in accordance with all MOE standards. We have letters of support from Grit Engineering, which you have, the Huron Manufacturing Association, which I can present, and I just had one from the Ontario Agribusiness Association as I walked in. I can read that or present it as well. Huron East has engaged us too many times to mention to promote this area. We have proudly helped the municipality the County of Huron promote the virtues of Vanasser to outside companies. The BDO for Huronis circulated a property brochure showcasing our industrial properties as a drawing card for the municipality to attract much needed new industry in the area. Further demonstrating the municipality approves, promotes, and advocates the current land usage. And we do have some local zoning considerations. In more recent years, 138 Main Street, Seaforth was rezoned from an office building into an apartment building less than 30 meters from an active railroad siding and grain elevator. Since the zoning is permitted, we believe that this act alone is a precedence. In other words, if people can reside next to a grain elevator and a busy railroad with heavy traffic, therefore we should be allowed to use the property as it was zoned. And I wish to comment a little bit about the Vanastra, we call it the checkerboard zoning. If you examine current proposed zoning on Huron GIS, it is a checkerboard. It stands, as it stands, there are properties with M2 zoning abutting CS1, C5, R2, R3, and CF. It is unfair to downgrade one property and allow other owners to maintain the same property opportunities. And you can look on the GS maps, I have them as well. In closing, I welcome the council to visit us to see what we do. Perhaps this would demonstrate how we operate our business. I would further welcome all questions. We are doing business according to MOE permitting standards. We have engineering and MOE approvals to do our business. We have adopted best management practices, working with the Asaba Bayfield Conservation Authority. Voting in favor of the zoning changes contradictory to the economic development objectives of Huron East and the County of Huron Economic Development. We should be allowed to operate our business. We bought this parcel of land to expand our business several years ago. We require the property to maintain viable. The business we are doing of Vanasser Packaging is perfectly legal and should be allowed to continue accordingly. Quite frankly, I am very appalled and discouraged with this proposed zoning change. As a long-standing business in the community, it would be my expectation to have more support to operate and expand a business. It feels that our wings have been clipped and the rug pulled out from underneath us. As a property owner, property rights should not be arbitrarily taken from an individual. It is unfair. Once more, we should not have to fight to protect our property rights. If this happens to this property, what will happen next time the official plan is under review? In all fairness, we should have been engaged rather than steamrolled into making a change to zoning. If I had not come across this post on social media, I may not have none the wiser. In conclusion, we wish to advocate, promote, and protect our property rights. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. A couple things. One, there's certainly no decision being made tonight. This is an information thing. So any other documentation or anything that you have, please make sure that the county staff have it so that it's part of the final report.
Sure.
So that when a decision is made by Huron East Council, that all that information is available for them at the same time. Having everything in one package makes it a lot easier to make a decision. If I can just start off for a second, Denise, and should have been writing them down, but I think I got about three things that we're all tied together. First of all, if we did change the zoning on this piece of property that we're talking about, is it still grandfathered in for the uses that it has right now? Second of all, I've certainly seen in the past where we've specifically set up, we were gonna have residential, and then we were gonna have light, and then you were gonna have heavier. So I understand the reason for the transition, but even if this one was rezoned, but it was grandfathered in and they could not and didn't have to make any changes, if they expanded farther, I guess it might be west, away from the apartment complex, would the zoning of this property that is currently proposed to be changed affect building a more substantial factory just to the west, which is farther away from the apartment with their current packaging plant in between. And I guess the only other concern that I can think of right at the moment is that if somebody else wanted to do something in the area, if it's rezoned, even though they're grandfathered in, does that give somebody else more ammunition to complain down the road? As in, you know what, I built my property, I checked the zoning and it was only this, and I now want to file a complaint because there's either too much noise, dust, whatever. I think they're all tied together.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I appreciate the perspective. I think, as staff, we're looking at it one way. I think it's very helpful to hear what a property owner's perspective is. In terms of the existing property, so the property that we were discussing on 7th Avenue is the one that is the former arena property. So just to be clear, there are no changes proposed on the Vanastra packaging site in terms of where the operation is today. They recently put up a new leg in the past couple of years. I actually worked with them as the planner to do that work, fully understand the ECA process that's in place there. No changes proposed. Where we were looking at was the M1 property, so the former arena is currently zoned EIND, and it immediately abuts to the east the condominium that is a former barrack in Vanastra. Immediately to the south, there's also a residential property, actually also owned by the Ouds. And then there's another property zoned residential that was formerly a barracks in the ownership of Huron East, which I understand you have recently sold to another party. So this is the property that's sort of right above all of those residential sites. When we looked at the zoning, so there's no grandfathering because there's no use. The property is vacant today. So just to get started, there's no grandfathering. If someone came along and wanted to establish an industrial use on this property, what we wanted to effectively communicate to them is that you have the combination of the Lions apartment, the vacant former barracks, that's R3, residential immediately to the south, and residential immediately to the east. So we wanted to effectively communicate that some of the uses that are listed in the IND zone today and would be listed in the general industrial or M2 zone going forward are not considered to be viable uses on this property because of the proximity to residential. And so we only removed those uses that we thought were the most noxious. So things like a ready-mix concrete plant, a cannabis, feeder flour mill, if we can go through the list. It was more of the noxious things that said, this isn't going to be viable at this location. And so that was the original thinking of staff. If I hear the second question from the mayor, I think it's about, how could site design be used to transition? So let's say, knowing that the Ouds own not only this property, but also own the property to the west. Let's say they chose to expand the factory immediately north of their existing facility, right? And then maybe further to the east is where there's parking area, stormwater management pond, maybe there's some outdoor storage areas. There might be an opportunity to use site design to essentially create that transition and keep the more noise emitting or dust, odor, whatever the air emissions might be, further to the west, away from those residences. So that is an option to use site design. Again, I'm sort of bringing this to the benefit that I know the other holdings that the Ouds have in this area. If you only owned the arena property, former arena property, it would be more difficult because you simply don't have the space to work with. Your third question was about complaints. So what we have in Vanastra, and it's the same as what we have in parts of Seaforth and in parts of Brussels, is we have a bit of product of history. Our industrial areas are immediately abutting residential areas. And so we have to try to work with that the best we can. Again, as I talked about at the beginning of this, our goal in planning is land use compatibility for the long term. We want to protect the sensitive uses and their quality of life. We also want to protect our employment areas. These are incredibly important, as Jason has alluded to, in terms of the economic impact on our region, employment. And what we don't want to see happen is that those industries be saddled with additional costs to try to mitigate impacts on sensitive uses and proximity. So again, from a staff perspective, the idea of moving to a two-zone approach, the benefit of it is it helps to communicate in which areas of the municipality do we anticipate that light industrial uses are more appropriate than the general industrial uses. I just want to note, most of the M2 uses are also permitted in M1. M1, the light only removes the most noxious uses, so the ones that would be associated with the most air emissions in terms of noise, dust, odor, etc. So I'm very willing to sort of go back and reflect on this approach and again, making sure that landowners are, aware of these changes being made. But just to kind of help council understand, that was the thinking behind it from a staff perspective, is that we've allowed industrial to be right up against the borders of residential today. And in some cases, that's not going to be practical in terms of allowing that full suite of industrial uses to locate on that property.
Councillor Chartrand.
Yeah, but I have a hard time with this, similar to the property down by the tracks, because we wanted to change the zoning on that.
Yes.
And we voted not to, because the owner of the property came here and said, look, I bought this property knowing it was zoned this way.
Mhm.
And I had plans for the future, and now all of a sudden you want to change it. This is kind of the same thing, so the property right now, if the zoning doesn't change to the new zones, he's allowed to build on it as industrial,
Yes.
right? But the change constricts him from doing that.
No, it still allows for a large number of industrial uses. It removes a select number of permitted uses, being a concrete mixing plant, a cannabis facility, a feed and flour mill. Like, so there's a list of the more, as I say, some would be removed, the rest would all remain.
So you're saying he can do what he wants to do on that property?
I don't know what the permitted use is, or what the proposed use is for the property. I think what they're looking for from hearing the delegation this evening is they're looking for maximum flexibility, which I can understand.
But he purchased the property that way, right? Knowing that he could do it in the future.
Again, I think what I'm saying is that there's environmental compliance approval requirements. I think what Mr. Out is saying is that he believes they could maintain all of those approvals even at this proximity to residential.
I just believe if somebody purchased a piece of property with intentions and that they should be grandfathered. Because you've taken away, you've handcuffed them basically, compared to what he wanted to do when he purchased the property.
That will be an interesting discussion when we have
Yes.
it. Councillor Stepford.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Jason. Did we, when we were going through this, analyze some of our current businesses that may be affected by zoning changes of existing business and then talk to them ahead of time, or did we just do a blanket aerial changes and zoning changes based on the, based what you're saying? My concern would be that Mr. Al, like he said in his speech, wouldn't know, or just lucky he picked up social media to get it.
Right.
So, did we go to the potential affected businesses? Hey, this is potentially on here, you might want to, look at it, or do we just do our job like we normally?
Yeah, we did not send direct letters, but I would note for council that we made changes, like in passing the new zone maps. There are changes on lots of properties, right? And so we did not send letters directly to any group, whether it was, farmers that have natural environment changes, if you were in a settlement area, so we did not send direct letters. I would note though that we did not change the zoning on any existing industry, because those were existing businesses, so we left the M2s on all of them.
Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions, if I may, to Denise and Shay. You mentioned enroachment. Going forward,
Mhm.
if there are areas now that are R1 and you got M1 or M2, is that what it is?
Yeah.
How big a buffer? And if you do have a buffer of 60 meters or 40 meters, what could that land be used for?
So there's not a set buffer. It would depend on the type of industry, the height of the emitting source of noise, dust, odor, whatever it is. So it's not, there's no specific number I can give you. But we do try to use site planning certainly, and as I said, if you had a buffer zone, the types of things you could put in there would be parking areas, stormwater management ponds, open space, to try to maximize the distance between the industry and the sensitive receptor. That's how you'd use site design to do that. And it could be enforced through the site plan control process.
I'm not keen on too much open or vacant space, and in this case, I like grandfathers. My next question is about the farm residence buildings. You have set up to 4 units
Yes,
for employees.
yes.
How many employees can go in each unit? Is there a limit?
There's not a limit on the number of bedrooms per unit, but we are putting an overall unit limit. So, they can have up to 4 units for on-farm labor housing.
Yeah.
Within that, the code would regulate how many bedrooms, for example, could be in each unit. We don't get into that level of detail in the zoning bylaw.
So somebody could build, as long as they met the building code standards, you could build 4 units and have 20 people in each unit?
I don't think the code would allow them to get to 20 people per
Well,
unit,
I'm
but
just,
yeah, I think what we're saying is, yes, it could still be a very large on-farm residence housing. Just to give a bit of the history. So prior to the general update, the Huron zoning bylaw permitted on-farm labor housing in mobile homes only. What the feedback from the farm community was that they wanted an opportunity to invest in a more permanent structure. And so we allowed, yes, you could build an on-farm labor housing in something other than a mobile home. At that time, we did not put in a unit limit. Since then, we recognized that should have been there. That was an omission. And so this is more of a correction. To date, we have seen some farms. So this was a change that was made across the county. I know of, there's a property in South Huron. They've built a rather large on-farm labor housing for a turkey processing plant. Otherwise, I'm aware of one farmer who's taken up the option of building the 4 units. For most commercial scale farms, they don't necessarily need 4, but they might need more than 1. So this provides a bit of flexibility, but still allows us to make sure that that policy isn't going to be abused by having that unit limit on it.
but again, if they come to Mr. Dietrich
Mhm.
and they have a groundwater, like, septic survey that, et cetera.
Yep.
And everything else, potentially the sky could be the limit.
Currently, there's no unit limit. We're saying put in a unit limit. If what you're saying is that each unit could have, let's say, 4 bedrooms, then yes, you could have 16 bedrooms, I suppose, for farm labor housing on a commercial scale farm. Yes, that is possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other, Deputy Mayor?
It's very few to the news. Denise, back to the industrial, again, that M1 and M2,
Mhm.
just a little confused. So if I had a business and it's currently, let's say I have one of these concrete plant that I'm operating, I've
Mhm.
operated for years. But all the land around me is now being rezoned as M2. So I can still operate there.
Yeah.
Because I'm grandfathered in. What happens when I sell it?
Yeah, no changes. The example I would just respond with is that, let's say you're operating, you have an M2 zone. If I'm purchasing an M2 zone to build my business, well, I have a reasonable expectation that that's an area in which I can operate an M2 use. I know we also have to get an environmental compliance approval to make sure we meet all of our requirements. If I, as an industrial operator, was found not to meet the requirements, potentially I'd have to mitigate, right? So I might have to cover fans with hood ranges. I might have to put up an acoustical wall. I might have to do things that mitigate that. As an industrial operator, I don't want to have that happen because that's, it's costly. So I think the goal is that what we also want to do as council is we want to think about where we have M2 uses. We want to be really clear that we're not intensifying or allowing residential uses to encroach any further. Because we need to protect those industries that are already operating in our small towns. So we have had examples of this over the past couple of years. And I think that it's just something that's come up for council. That going to a 2-zone approach would allow staff and the community a chance to be a little bit more clear as to which areas are M1 and which are M2. One option that we did certainly discuss as staff is to leave everyone that's existing as an M2 and use the M1 approach on a go-forward basis. That is one option that staff can consider and give some thought to over the next month and bring back some options for council to consider at the March 4th.
There's, actually, Councillor Dalton was next.
Oh, yeah, thank you. This is a little bit simplified, Denise. I like your maps. They're a lot cleaner. And I recognized your sample one right away. It's right around my neighborhood. I noticed with your AG2, AG1, some of the farms with severed houses are AG4 on that, but then they're also AG2. Some of the farms aren't. So is that a minimum distance separation thing, or is that just?
Nope, so I can tell you what that's from. So AG4s are results of surplus farm dwelling severances as well as retirement lot severances or lots of record that existed throughout Huron East through time. Those are the AG4s. The AG2 is applied when we do a surplus farm dwelling severance and we have to restrict a residence on the remainder of the farm. Keep in mind that that requirement was not always there. So there would have been a point in time in the 1990s where council would have done what was a surplus farm dwelling severance or a retirement severance, and you didn't have to restrict a house on the retained lands. So that's why some farms have an AG2 and some farms don't.
So these farms that don't, you can have another house on them.
Correct.
Oh, good. I just noticed that that's the reason then. Interesting. I didn't realize that was, thank you.
I was really happy to hear your last comment there, Denise, about the fact that other things that you're considering. So it sounds like we could easily come up with a compromise that satisfies just about everybody here. I think, or I'm asking if this is a reasonable approach, and I understand the reason, and M1 was the lighter of the two, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just to get my phrases right. So I understand the reason why we would like to have, and the municipality should also like to have M1 closer to the residential area so that we don't get conflict. Is there any possibility of, because this was an area that was picked out to be changed to M1, could it be left at M2, but with something attached to the property that if the outs build something that falls within the M1, it can then be converted to M1 because it's already been built on, nothing's been changed, or if the property changes hands, that it goes to M1, so anybody coming in. But if the outs, which own the property now and bought it as technically an M2, if they chose to develop it today as an M2 could, is anything like that possible, or does that become too cumbersome?
Yeah, I think it's quite possible. I think again, it's about clear communication, again, making sure that people are apprised. So I think, I think it is possible. It's something that we could do through future zone changes as time goes on, but I do wonder if leaving the M2s and then using the M1 on a go-forward approach would give staff the opportunity to clearly communicate to people at the time of their developments, this portion of your property is going to be light industrial moving forward, and this is what that means, right? And I think just having more of that communication, the goal of this project was really about getting the maps updated. We took the opportunity to make a few other, what we saw as improvements or corrections. The goal for us as staff is to get the revised maps passed so that they continue to work well. So we will go back to the drawing board on the M1, M2 approach.
I do have one other comment. The last time we updated the maps, I do remember at county council, there was a lot of pushback from councilors who after the fact got calls from ratepayers in their municipalities about the fact that they weren't aware of what happened. Now, I think there was a lot of confusion about what actually changed the last time some maps were done, and it wasn't what people actually thought, but still the big concern is that not enough people were aware of what was going on. So I'm a little just concerned and asking that you can pass on the comment that if Jason hadn't found the Facebook page or whatever, had been made aware of it, and as you stated yourself, the county chose not to send letters out to the actual property owners. I'm just concerned that we could get pushed back again. I accept the fact that all we're trying to do is improve the system. But if people aren't aware that there possibly are changes to their properties and they find out after the fact, they're not usually happy with us.
Right. Point well taken. I think that when we brought the initial project initiation, we talked about communication at length about how we were gonna do it. I said at that time that we weren't proposing to send letters. But it's something that, you know, for example, if council, your official plan was last reviewed in 2016. You are sort of, would be next in line for an official plan review. This might be a comment that I would bring back to council at that time to say, council, if we're gonna do a 5-year review of the official plan, let's think about sending out individual letters. There is a substantive cost to that. It's about, you know, so it's just to be thinking about if that's a priority of council, we can certainly apply that on a go forward basis. I would say significant efforts were made to communicate this project in various mediums. A letter to them. You know, we can think about that.
One advantage the municipality has is there's at least 2 or 3 times a year we send a letter to every one of our property owners. Are there any other questions from members of the public or council at this time?
Yeah, thanks for explaining them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, we got 4 minutes. Look at that. We have to adjourn this meeting. Okay.
I'll wake up in the next morning. and hear-
Can I get a mover and a seconder to adjourn the public meeting? Moved by Councilor Fisher, second by Councilor Morrison, that the public meeting do adjourn at 5:56 PM. All those in favor?